again. It's item number 10, and it's Ross. I just presumed that this was so straightforward, we'd already passed it, Ross. I will ask Councillor Simpson to move this motion. I'll second it. And Ross, it's quite straightforward. Perhaps you could speak to the item and the scope of the review that's being proposed for human resources.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Your Worship. This is the latest review in the organisational support group of activities. It will cover the value chain from a human resources perspective. So how do we set the strategy? How do we determine the capabilities that we need? How do we recruit, induct, train people? How do we reward them? How do we look after staff's well-being and their health and safety? How do we manage performance? And how we run payroll? The review will start in early May and should be concluded in September this year. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. This is, of course, referred to this committee by appointment, performance review and value for money committee. But if there are questions, yeah, Councillor Wayne Walker. Can we have your microphone on, please, Councillor?
So I'm looking at the item, and quite obviously the context is value for money. So how much money do we spend across the council group on human resources?
So at this point in time, I don't know how much we spend on running the human resource function, but we spend, close to $800 million in terms of staff costs across the year, across the group.
Okay, so I'm just suggesting, Mr. Mayor, that it would be useful to have that information, and I'm not knocking human resources. I'm entirely supportive of that function. And just in respect of the idea of value for money and performance review, I'm assuming that we're obviously looking at the money, but we're in particular looking at efficiency and how we can have better performance across that area. Essentially, that's my understanding.
Yeah, and through the chair, I mean, the legislation, Section 17A of the Local Government Act, asks us to review the cost effectiveness of our services. We have expanded that to make it wider, to capture the elements you're talking about, Councillor, in terms of performance and have we set ourselves up for success in the future. And so to be able to look forward as well as to look historic as part of these reviews.
Just further to that, my particular concern goes to issues around health and safety, the well-being of people across the organisation and the place that human resources has in that. Because we know from studies, reviews, that at times we're not the best performing organisation across some of those issues.
Thank you. Councillor Fesso-Collins.
Thanks, Chair. Just interested in what the diversity and inclusion lens over the review process will look like.
Through the chair, at this stage, we have not scoped out the review, so I haven't done detailed planning. Post the terms of reference, we'll do detailed planning, which then, on the quarterly reporting back to the PR VFM committee and how we're progressing. But I haven't actually scoped any of the review beyond the terms of reference at this stage, as into how we will do the work.
Thank you.
Supplementary, sir?
Yep, further question, Councillor.
So I guess, is there an intention then to use the current framework? We've got a diversity and inclusion framework. The CEO has to respond, or part of his KPIs, whatever we call it, includes that. There will be that consideration made in looking at the review overall. So not looking at what you're going to do post the terms of reference, but that's going to be a guiding view on getting to the terms of reference.
Yes, and through the chair, yes. To look at the framework, is it fit for purpose and is it delivering the outcomes that we're seeking? Yeah.
Great, thank you. Any further questions? Are there any comments? If not, the motion is to approve the terms of reference for the Human Resource Management Services Review. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Now, this time we will get to item number 11, the panel report on public safety and nuisance bylaw. And we have Paul Wilson, and you're on your own, Paul, are you? Oh, Panya Elliott here. I will ask also Councillor Cooper to move the recommendation. Do we have a seconder? Seconder, Councillor Collins. And do you want to begin, or would you? Yeah, I'll invite Councillor Cooper to introduce it.
Panel recommendation. So, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the panel's presenting its recommendations on proposed changes to the public safety nuisance bylaw. I had on the panel with me Councillor Casey, who is at a funeral today, Councillor Newman, and IMSB member Renata Blair. The Regulatory Committee completed the review of the bylaw as is required on a 5-yearly review in June 2018, and the review found the bylaw was generally working, but there were some changes that were needed to better protect people from nuisance and unsafe behaviours and activities. That statement of proposal that was put together and adopted unanimously by the Regulatory Committee was then adopted unanimously by the governing body in September 2018 to go out for consultation. So the proposed changes seek to better protect people from nuisance and unsafe behaviours and activities in public places. And I won't read them all out, but they're in paragraph 13 on page 45 of the report. Local boards, mana whenua and mata waka and key stakeholders were specifically notified about the proposal, and we had feedback from them. The public had the opportunity to provide feedback in a variety of ways, including writing, online, email or post, or verbally at 5 public have your say sessions around the region and a stakeholder one-on-one session and a hui for rangatahi Māori. Though the have your say events out in public weren't well attended, but we had a lot of online feedback. So we had approximately 1,865 individual feedback responses, and I just want to clarify something that Councillor Collins said earlier. There wasn't any overwhelming trend that said that people were afraid of young brown men in hoodies. One person said that. So I just want to be clear, because I don't want people to think that Aucklanders think that generally, and that wasn't the feedback that we got, and that wasn't canvassed. So we deliberated on the public feedback received on the 18th of February, and our recommendations are summarised by the topic in table 1 on page 45 of the report, and more detail in attachment A. We actually, the recommendation supported the intent of the proposal. We thought it was very sound, and the public thought it was sound. And there were just 2 minor amendments for that weren't unanimous. One was the proposed changes clarifying rules about scattering of ashes, which Councillor Newman and IMSB member Renata Blair opposed. And that wasn't the scattering of ashes in the regional parks. It was a general request from Ngāti Whātua to ban that. And then a recommendation to decline prohibiting vehicles on Muriwai and Kareatahi beaches, as these will be reviewed when the AT traffic bylaw review commences, and we thought as a panel that was the better place to address that, as these beaches are considered as a public road. And member Renata Blair opposed that. So we asked that the governing body approve the panel recommendations and adopt the bylaw as amended by the panel. I want to really thank Councillors Casey Newman and IMSB member Renata Blair, because it was a lot of work and a lot to get through. We're also, the panel's here to answer any questions, and our staff, but Mr. Mayor, I would like to add, they've been added up there and you've accepted them, I hope, because the matter of ash scattering and artefact placement is an issue, but we felt to outright ban it at the panel was, we did not have, when we asked the question about, we talked about no ash scattering in regional parks, that was what went out to the public, not a general ban, and we didn't think the public had enough information or opportunity to comment on that. So we didn't think it was appropriate to do that in this process. But what I undertook to do, as I said at the panel with Councillor Newman and IMSB Renata Blair, was to actually put this piece of work on our books. I have been struggling with this for the last 5 years because there's definitely a clear conflict between different cultures and different needs in our community. And so I think we need to have a much bigger conversation in our community about this, and having a resolution on the books that we ask the Chief Executive to instruct council departments to look at this and report, to create a framework for this discussion for our community, I think would be the most helpful way forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And our staff are here to ask questions.
Thank you very much, Councillor, and can I repeat your thanks to yourself, Councillors Casey and Newman and Renata Blair. I know you've put a huge amount of work into this, and the report we're receiving is an end product of that work. Is there anything, Paula Pania, that you wish to add to Councillor Cooper's comments?
No, but we're happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Right, so it's open to questions. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Got a few questions. Essentially, they go to set netting, which has been a priority issue for the community that I represent. And first of all, just for clarity, page... Just trying to find page 52, just mentions retain current council set netting restrictions. So I'm making the assumption that the restrictions that are in place at Arkles Bay, Omaha and the like remain in place?
Correct.
Right? Then later it says any new set net bans must be made through a separate process. It doesn't describe what that process is. Could you clarify that?
Certainly, through the Chair, so the current bylaw had a process in place to receive requests for further set net bans. That's how the Arkles Bay and current bans were put in place. This bylaw has kept that framework. What it's done is to clarify how that framework works, but the process is much the same. Whereas before they made a request, they will still make a request.
Okay, great. And then the other matter is just an error or omission. So I'm looking at page 71, part 10, and point 1 says the council may restrict or close entry to the whole, in brackets, or part of any council or more. So I'm assuming the words that are missing are council-controlled public place or the like. So that's just a correction, really. Okay?
Thank you. We'll note that.
Thank you very much, Councillor. With no other questions, we'll move straight to commentary. Is there anyone that wishes to comment on the recommendations? You've got a question, Councillor Desley Simpson.
Sorry, Worship. I thought there'd be quite a few questions and there isn't, so that's actually quite positive. I just want to ask a question around the aggressive and intimidating behaviour. Could you please clarify, just from my personal perspective, that has been removed, and my understanding is that that has been replaced by something that is more wider. Could you just give me some clarity around the reason for the removal and how potentially, if at all, that it's still covered but in a different way? I just need some clarity around that. Thank you.
Certainly, through the Chair. I think the important thing to bear in mind is that in relation to any behaviour that is intimidating or aggressive or causes a nuisance, that was previously covered in the bylaw and it remains to be covered in the bylaw. The proposal simply sought to streamline and to clarify that that indeed is the case. So the bylaw has been drafted in a way that says any behaviour that causes a problem in a public place is unacceptable, and the bylaw can be used to address that issue. So it doesn't matter what the activity is, it's the behaviour that it focuses on.
Thank you. Further question, Councillor Simpson.
Supplementary, I hate to labour the point, but I just want to be absolutely clear. So if somebody asked me, is public begging covered in your bylaw, the answer would be yes. Is that correct?
So through the Chair, the response would be if that activity is causing a nuisance or that person is intimidating another person, it is absolutely covered and always has been. Right.
So if that person was just begging quietly on their own in a shop window, that is no longer, that was that in it before, and has it been removed?
So to clarify through the Chair, that was never in the current bylaw and never has been. It's always been the behaviours that we have been targeting.
Thank you. Councillor Daniel Newman.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to reserve my right to speak, but with respect to can you outline to me the continued discussions? Can you explain the continued discussions? Who are the parties to the continued discussions? And what is the time frame for resolution of those discussions?
Thank you, through the chair. And this is the matter that Jay talks to. So the task for staff and Jay is to develop that process that answers all of those key questions, and it has a time frame to bring that back to the committee. And at that point, we can establish how best to go forward.
If it is the case that by the conclusion of June, that we arrive at a point where there is a view that we actually do need to address this from a regulatory perspective, are we going to have to go and revisit this bylaw? And what will be the timing for that?
So through the chair, if that was the wish of the relevant committee or governing body, then that would be a matter for staff to put on its program. And yes, it would be an amendment to a bylaw, but that is a work programming issue.
Mr. Chair, can I just clarify, Jay?
Councillor Cooper.
Jay is to get a process together. That's what's going to be reported back, and it's going to go to Environment and Community, because at the moment it's not a regulatory issue. It is an issue around effect on our communities and our environment. And so Councillor Hulse has agreed that that is the right place for that discussion. So all that will come back in June to that committee is, here's the framework. Who's going to answer those questions? Who's going to be involved? How do we go about it? What is the time frame? And so we've never done this particular piece of work, and we need to carefully and sensitively find all the right people and have the discussion. So we won't have a decision about banning, not banning in June under this proposal.
Okay, any further questions, Councillor? Otherwise, I'll call Councillor Mike Lee.
Mr. Mayor, I'm a little bit confused about the status of this plan as it relates to this bylaw, proposed bylaw, as it relates to the 2013 bylaw, which it amends and still uses the title, though it is substantially changed. The 2013 bylaw was a joint bylaw, if you will, under the responsibility of Auckland Council, where relevant, and Auckland Transport, where relevant. Can you explain to me, is this new proposed bylaw to be administered solely by Auckland Council, and there will in effect be another bylaw administered by Auckland Transport? Is that how it's working?
Yes, through the chair, that is correct. There are two bylaws currently that regulate public safety and nuisance behaviours in Auckland. And this bylaw is the Auckland Council's bylaw that addresses areas like parks and civic spaces. And the Auckland Transport bylaw, which is of the same name, addresses the similar issues that occur on land that they are responsible for.
So if we pass this, there'll be two bylaws, public safety and nuisance bylaws of 2013, an updated Auckland Council bylaw, and a separate and not necessarily updated Auckland Transport bylaw. Is that the result?
That is correct. Auckland Transport is responsible for reviewing its bylaw, and that it has a program in place to do that.
And this bylaw has in effect exported or shucked off responsibilities that it believes properly belong to Auckland Transports. Is that correct?
Correct.
So there's not a joint administration of there's two separate bylaws. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Chris Darby.
Yeah, just clarification on the I and the J. I can really understand what the members were addressing there. Just in terms of, were they addressing rivers and streams and marine areas?
No.
Through the chair, they were particularly concerned about the streams and rivers that run through the council parks, but waterways in general.
Not the receiving environment of marine areas and the scattering of ashes in marine areas.
I believe that they were concerned about just scattering of ashes in water per se, particularly in food gathering areas.
Sorry, clarification. Water per se, which is marine areas and rivers and streams. Is that what they're trying to convey there? Because waterway is not a water course. A water course is a river and a stream. A waterway is not. So I'm just, if it is water courses and marine areas, it probably needs to say that. And I'm just trying to get clarification. What were they asking for? A waterway is a place by which a vessel passes.
We can put the right.
I think it's a really good question, and having talked to people that are involved in this issue, it definitely relates to the marine areas and not just the streams. So maybe we could, with the approval of the mover and the seconder, just alter that to reflect that it is waterways and marine areas. Does that do the trick?
Well, I think it's water courses. A waterway is not a
water courses. Sorry, I'm out of your expertise. So water courses and marine areas?
Rivers and streams and the ocean or the moana.
Well, that would be easier for most people to understand.
Water courses and marine areas.
Water courses and marine areas. So with the acceptance of the mover and the seconder, we'll amend that accordingly. Councillor Sharon Stewart.
Thank you. Just on the aggressive and intimidating behaviour around begging, with the bylaws, I know we've got some bylaws in place now, but people tend to have to rely on ringing the call centre if there's a problem with this nuisance. And sometimes I just wonder, with the council staff, anybody walking past or driving, do they have to wait for something to be logged by a general member of the public, or can, if we have staff that are walking by and they see it, they can then act upon it? Because I know one of the things that happens constantly, just driving out of the council car park, just where the Sky City is, there's quite often there's people that are begging there or window washing, and often members of the public, it's happened to me and it's happened to many people I've seen, where the window washers get quite aggressive if you don't want to pay them any money, you not always have cash on you, and they squirt soapy water all over your window, so you can't actually go with and you miss the green light, so you end up having to go and let them clean it, or you know, so it's quite aggressive out there. So one of the things that I hear all the time about our bylaws, we've got all these bylaws, but none of the really, they haven't really got the teeth, or action doesn't always happen to them. And sometimes if you ring up on the call centre and say that, you know, there's an issue somewhere, you're then told, well, there could be 2 or 3 days before we come back to you. Well, the problem's all moved on by then. So I think with the bylaws and the actions of the enforcement and everything all need to, something has to work a bit better. So have you got any comments on that?
Through the chair, yes, our compliance staff can act on things that they see, and the other thing just would be to point out that we do have city patrols as well, which assist with all those issues.
Okay, we come now for comment. So are there any councillors who would like to speak to the item? Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Members, I had the dubious honour of chairing the 2013 Public Safety and Nuisance Bylaw, and its task was to amalgamate the various related bylaws of the legacy councils into one integrated bylaw, and given public safety and nuisance relates to the public, it was thought wise and sensible to ensure that Auckland Transport and Auckland Council, who have a joint authority over streets and public areas, work together and come up with one integrated plan that is easily understood by members of the public and readily enforceable by both agencies in cooperation. I am concerned that what was portrayed as a minor or routine review and amendment and updating of this bylaw is actually quite a radical change. Whole parts have been excised out, and the whole concept of an integrated approach by the Auckland Council family vis-a-vis the public has gone by the board. There is a tendency in all bureaucracies to say, well, this is not my department, it's somebody else's department. And you know, and I know that the public, because we're all members of the public as well, find this very frustrating at times. But what has happened here is this not in my department tendency is going to be unwittingly reinforced in contrast to what we agreed on in 2013. So that's quite a major procedural and philosophical change in the whole attitude of public safety and nuisance. The whole concept is to give, if not to ensure public safety, give the public reassurance that their concerns and even their fears are well understood and catered for by the council that takes their rates. And so, Mr. Mayor, I am disappointed that whole swathes of the original bylaw, I think it was part 1, have been completely removed, including the vex and quite emotive question in regard to begging, street begging. Back in 2013, there was significant pressure on the council from some quarters to ban begging altogether, as happens in some cities. We resisted that, but to take into account public concerns, we made it clear that intimidation and nuisance begging was an offence under the bylaw, something that the council would intervene on because the police would not. And if a member of the public cannot find relief in the council or the police, you would agree that that's not an entirely ideal or satisfactory situation. But that was the situation up until 2013. It was not in my department. We rectified that, and also we identified a range of behaviours that, in response to public concern, that we identified to give the people of Auckland some assurance that we had listened to them and that we had taken a measured approach in responding and catering for those concerns. So I have to say there was some resistance within the council to taking those steps. Council officers actually submitted, along with the public, which was questionable, and then same individuals attempted to deliberate on the outcome of the submission hearing, which the boom was lowered on. However, Mr. Mayor, I opposed the removal of the very modest, mild restrictions that we put in there to take into account members of the public and business people in the high streets, including Queen Street and other suburban areas, about problem begging. I think it's a negative, a retrogressive step, will leave the public confused and dissatisfied, especially as now, if we endorse this, there's going to be an entirely separate bylaw run by Auckland Transport.
Thank you, Councillor. We have Councillor Daniel Newman.
Your Worship, I'm not going to vote against the recommendations there, including I and J, but I just want to, for the record, restate the argument that I gave, and I think Renata Blair gave, because he voted with me on this, in relation to the scattering of ashes issue. The feedback came from Ngāti Whātua, Ngāti Whanaunga, excuse me, Whanaunanga, Ngāti Tiata and Tamaoho, and the reasons why they set out their opposition to the scattering of ashes is the kaitiakitanga that they exercise in relation to Tāmaki Makaurau, and they find the dispersal of ashes in waterways to be culturally inappropriate and abhorrent. Those were the reasons set out in the submission. Now, I accept that other members of the panel took a different view, but it was we moved an amendment, and the amendment was defeated on the casting vote. The amendment would have prohibited the scattering of ashes in all public waterways because mana whenua a kaitiaki, ashes in waterways are culturally inappropriate, and that we wanted to support the feedback from iwi. Now, I note that the reasons for the decline give that there is more time is required for continued discussions in a timely manner to reach, quote, a satisfactory resolution, end quote. Precisely what a satisfactory resolution means is not clarified because I suspect there wouldn't be agreement on that. So in some respects, we've kicked the can forward. I want to acknowledge the chair of the Regulatory Committee, Linda Cooper, who is clearly trying very hard to broker discussions for an outcome, and it would appear that we're going to try and formalise this into a process starting at the June meeting of the Environment and Community Committee. Good luck, because I suspect that we could end up in a situation where somebody will talk to somebody about something at some point, and that at some point subsequent we will have another discussion about this, and eventually we'll arrive back at the same debate about whether this is a practice that is permitted or whether it shouldn't be permitted. And I will be voting for the position that I took at the hearing, that this is not a culturally appropriate practice, and that I have particular sympathy for mana whenua, who are the guardians and who have identified that this is an abhorrent practice. And I think, Your Worship, if this is a matter that is to be brokered for a resolution, it will require your specific input, because I believe that the status of your office and the role that you have will be necessary to try and bridge what I think is quite a significant divide. So I support you and your intent around this, but I think that this will be a very difficult one, which is not going to ensure an easy resolution of some quite strongly held views, both for and against the scattering of ashes, for the reasons that have been set out by the submitters. And those submissions were relevant. We could have taken the opportunity to pass this. We haven't, but almost certainly it will be a matter that comes back for further debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you, Your Worship. fully support the recommendations, especially I and J. And the reason I do that is because mana whenua, there are 19 that are recognised currently, and it gives the opportunity for the 19 to have a say. The interesting thing is that I know. No, look, I might get myself in trouble, so I'll shut up in regards to what I know. But look, Your Worship, I think it's important, and getting it back to the Environmental and Community Committee allows the committee of a whole to end up making at least recommendations after the consultative process has happened. So I have always been consistent that it's important that we go out, especially in this particular case, to all our mana whenua that we recognised in the 19. So I definitely support the recommendations, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. Are there any other councillors wishing to speak? We'll have Councillor, Councillor Lee.
No, he's spoken.
I'm advised that it's too late for that because you've spoken, Councillor, is the advice I've got from officers.
Sorry?
Yeah. Just before we then come to Councillor Cooper's, will be address and reply to the motions. I just want to make a couple of brief comments. The first is in relation to ash scattering, and I think we've reached a sensible position here to go back to the interested parties to talk through and to try to find out whether there's some common ground. There is very clearly a clash in cultural practices among the mana whenua. It's wrong to scatter ashes at sea, though I think all of us are aware of many people that we've known that have followed that practice over time. For the Indian community, that is the place where they often scatter their ashes. And rather than imposing one cultural view on top of another, to try to find some sensible common ground where, and this is just a suggestion, perhaps we avoid the scattering of ashes where kaimoana is collected, that would make sense to me, or where people are swimming, but allow scope for both cultures to pursue what they traditionally believe in. That's the end point that I hope we'd get to. And Councillor, you know, that's not an easy solution to find. And local boards have approached me and said they've agonised over this and haven't been able to find a solution. But to simply come down and say, we're going to regulate this way without going to the nth degree to find that common ground and to meet the sensitivities of two different cultures would, in my opinion, be a mistake, which is why I support I and J. I just want to touch briefly on the question that Councillor Lee raised, and I accept the reason that he raised it. My understanding, and perhaps at the end of this, Councillor Cooper could confirm, or officials, but this does not derogate in any way from a ban on people begging in a way that willfully obstructs, disturbs, interferes with, alarms, distresses, intimidates, or harms. If it did that, I would be absolutely against the change. People sit quietly with a paper cup in front of them. I don't particularly like it, but it's not something that I think, and for the reasons that you expressed, Councillor Lee, you chose not to ban that. Where you are obstructing or intimidating people, absolutely, there has to be action. I think the problem is not with the bylaw, it's with the regularity with which we enforce that. And I listened to Councillor Stewart about the window washer, because I had that experience yesterday. That's actually now illegal by parliamentary statute, but still there's a guy that at the end of Federal Street that's there every day, and when you say, no, I don't want it, he goes ahead. So the problem we face is not that the bylaw doesn't exist to stop that behaviour, or in this case, the statutory control, but our enforcement of it. And I think that's where we've got to come back to focus on. The reason that I support this is, one, because it still does create that prohibition on aggressive begging, but I support it because it goes beyond that. And look, I don't care whether the person's a beggar, they've been drinking alcohol, or they're on drugs. If they are behaving in a way that willfully obstructs, disturbs, interferes with, alarms, distresses, or intimidates, we need to have that as unlawful according to our bylaw. And it's not just those on drugs or alcohol. From time to time, I find some fringe elements out there, either religious or political, that right up in your face, and you know they've got the right to put their point of view politically or on a religious basis. I have no problem with that, but equally they should be bound by a bylaw that says you can't go beyond a certain point where you're intimidating, obstructing, etc. And I think some of us have had that experience out on the street as well. So the question that I have actually to Councillor Cooper in a summing up, can you please provide assurance that this in no way reduces our ability to stop aggressive begging, but simply extends it to a range of other practices that we would regard as equally undesirable because it intimidates and obstructs? So perhaps if if I can, if I can just seek clarification of that, Councillor.
I will, and I think we've had quite a few sweeping statements about what's been removed and being duck shoved apparently. But if you look at page 77 in Schedule 1, it talks about begging activity. It is in there, and it says begging activity or soliciting on roads and footpaths next to a road are regulated by Auckland Transport Public Safety Nuisance Bylaw. We don't have the jurisdiction there.
That's not right.
Well, so am I still got my speaking
No,
turn?
no, I'm sorry. Please continue,
and
Councillor.
So that is their job to do that. The other issue here is talking about the fact that we're not enforcing window washers. That became the law for the whole country a year or two ago, and now it is a police matter. It is, we don't have the ability to enforce that ban. So that is not in our jurisdiction anymore. It used to be, but a law of the country changed that. We didn't change that. We didn't move it away. So that's another clarity. The other issue is that we take a graduated enforcement approach to all our compliance, and that means high harm, quick response. Low harm, we might have to get you a bit later, and it will be assessed on a case-by-case basis. But that was adopted unanimously by our regulatory committee, and everybody supported that because we know that we need to put the resources where they're needed more quickly. Okay, so we're not going to race out when someone complains about the fence next door being 1 inch over the height allowed. We're not going to go there straight away. But if somebody's being harmed, intimidated, there's an obstruction that causes a nuisance or compromises the safety of the public, we'll get out there immediately. And so that's how it works. The issue around, yeah, I guess there's not really much more for me to say. We want to address the behaviours, not certain people. We're not targeting certain named groups of people. That smacks of something else. We're targeting harmful or intimidating behaviour, nuisance behaviour, and that can happen with anybody. Anybody can do that. A person might not be begging, but they might be getting in your way. So we're to ignore them and only target the beggar. And I just hark back to the first item we had today around embracing people of difference and cultural diversity, and looking at a person that isn't the same as you and judging them because you don't like the look of them and expecting our staff to come along and get them out of your sight because it doesn't look good. That's not what we're trying to do here. But if that person, be they begging or not, is harming someone, yes, we go and deal with it. And we could say, what about students behaving badly when they've had a night out and they're drinking? Do we just target them? Do we target annoying politicians that keep walking across Aotea Square? No, we don't do that. It's about the behaviour. So I think that's what this is about. It is not going to diminish the amount of enforcement that we take up. So that I commend this to you, and also again thank the panel.
Thank you very much. So it's been moved and seconded. Point of order, Councillor Lee.
What's the point of order?
An amendment, and you suggested that I wasn't able to do that. I said they've read amendments up there already, and I would like to rule them on why, as an elected member of the governing body at a formal meeting, I cannot move an amendment to recommendations.
Thank you. I'm advised by council officers that you need to move the amendment before you speak to it and not afterwards. But I'll seek confirmation. That's.
Oh, well, I was foreshadowing that, Mr. Mayor, as I spoke, so that's no reason to shut down my rights, surely.
I'm sorry, Councillor, that's the ruling I'm giving on the advice of officers. We've now had the right of reply. So I'm going to put the motion.
Your Worship,
Councillor Fletcher.
Speaking to the concerns that have been expressed, I note that when we discussed recently the matter of the Eden Park grant, I chose not to speak because I wanted to move an amendment, and we chose during that debate to suspend standing orders in order that an amendment could be posed. I wonder whether we have that same opportunity today.
Well, I'm sorry. We've had the debate now, and it would be inappropriate to take any action of that nature retrospectively. I'm going to put the recommendations A through to J. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no.
No.
It's carried with. Yep, that is certainly allowed, Councillor, and happy to do that. And I'm sorry, Councillor, you don't have the call at the moment. Councillor Walker, do you want? No. So carried, and Councillor Mike Lee wishes to have his opposition.